He didn't have a warrant, didn't have backup, didn't even have permission to be there. But when the royal guard noticed something suspicious being wheeled into Camilla's son's private apartment, something that didn't belong there, he didn't ask questions. He knocked once, then kicked the door clean off its hinges. What followed was the most explosive royal confrontation in recent history. Shattered furniture, screaming threats, and a queen consort demanding the guard be arrested on the spot. Even King Charles stormed in, furious and ready to shut it all down. But none of it stopped him, because by the time the dust settled and a hidden vault was discovered behind a fake wall, what came out was so scandalous. The king didn't just reverse course, he handed over command, and what this royal guard uncovered might be the biggest cover-up the crown has ever tried to bury. So before we show you exactly what was found inside that apartment, make sure you're subscribed with the bell turned on and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Let's get into it. Mayfair didn't rush in the evenings. It moved like old money, slow, deliberate, wrapped in the kind of silence that came from knowing no one was watching. The buildings leaned slightly with age, their windows sealed behind thick velvet curtains, secrets baked into every brick, history sitting heavy on every corner. Sergeant Arthur Bainbridge stood just beyond the wrought iron gates at South Audley Street, one gloved hand resting lightly on the leather strap of his ceremonial crossbelt. His crimson tunic caught the dying light of a London sunset, but his eyes weren't admiring the view. They were locked, sharp, unblinking, on a crate being wheeled through the service entrance of 14B. It wasn't the size that stopped him. Crates moved through Mayfair all the time. Furniture, wine, art shipped between estates. It was the condition. Too clean. No scratches along the frame. No dust in the corners. And the Royal Collection tag fastened neatly to the side. Laminated. Seamless. The font alignment just slightly off, like someone had printed it fresh instead of pulling it from the registry archives. Arthur shifted his weight, adjusting his posture so no one would notice him studying it. Two porters in civilian clothes moved it quickly. No livery, no security escort. Just hired hands handling what looked like a piece from the late Queen's private collection. He stepped closer, casual, like he was clearing a leaf from the gate. His fingers grazed the edge of the crate as he passed. Pristine. Too pristine. He leaned in as if brushing dust away, and in that half-second his gloved hand reached the lower corner. His eyes caught the embossed seal. Technically correct. Official-looking. But the ink was newer than it should have been. The foil finish thinner than what Windsor used on original registry tags from 2019. These were things no one would ever notice, except him. Arthur didn't make a call. Didn't file a report, didn't even pull his tablet. He just stepped back, nodded like everything was fine, and let the porters pass inside. Because Sergeant Arthur Bainbridge had served the Crown for 18 years. He'd stood silent through protests, death threats, foreign dignitaries screaming 2 inches from his face. 2 tours in Kandahar before being reassigned to ceremonial duty. And if those years had taught him anything, it was this. Trust your gut when something feels wrong. Not dangerous wrong, deception wrong. And that crate wasn't being delivered. It was being hidden. And it wasn't going into some royal storage facility. It was going into the private apartment of Thomas Parker Bowles, son of the Queen Consort, man with 0 official clearance to possess anything stamped with the Royal Collection crest. Arthur turned down the alley, walked the side path without a word. No fanfare. No backup requested, no weapon drawn. But his jaw had locked, and the back of his neck ran cold with the kind of certainty that didn't come from hunches. It came from knowing. The lift dinged softly as he stepped inside. 5th floor, 1 hallway, 1 door. 14B. He knocked once, sharp, decisive, then waited. Inside, movement. A curtain rustled near the window. Footsteps. Then came the voice, cold, crisp, like ice scraping crystal. "Why are you here?" "Camilla." Arthur didn't flinch. She didn't open the door. "I said, why are you here, Sergeant?" He took one slow breath, eyes fixed on the wood grain in front of him. And without another word, he stepped back and drove his boot straight through the lock. Crack! The door slammed inward with a sound like breaking bone, wood splintering, hinges bending, paint cracking down the frame. The echo rolled down the marble corridor like a gunshot in a cathedral. Camilla's voice pitched from haughty to horrified in half a second. "Are you M.A.D.?" Sergeant Arthur Bainbridge stepped over the ruined threshold like it wasn't there. His boots crunched splinters. His bearskin brushed the bent doorframe. His crimson tunic remained perfect. His face did not. It was set, hard, quiet, not angry, colder than that, certain. Camilla had backed up several steps, still in her evening gown, emerald velvet, embroidered with royal crests that hadn't appeared on any official calendar. Her pearl earrings swung with the sudden motion. One hand gripped the wall. She stared at him like he was a stranger who'd just walked out of a nightmare. "You've lost your mind," she snapped, voice rising now. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Arthur scanned the entryway without answering. Gilded mirror, antique coat stand, a vase positioned just so to impress arriving guests. Too clean, too perfect, too curated. "Why are you here?" she barked again, louder now. "This is a private royal residence. You don't have clearance. You don't have a warrant. You're not even supposed to be on this floor." Arthur turned to face her, slow, deliberate. "Let me in, ma'am." She laughed. Not warmly, not in amusement, the kind of laugh that could cut glass. "On whose authority?" she sneered, stepping forward. "The King's?" She didn't move aside. She didn't need to. Arthur had already made the decision. Behind her, down the hall, an aide in a grey waistcoat froze. A housekeeper appeared at the kitchen threshold, eyes wide, then vanished. No one spoke. No one intervened. Because while Arthur Bainbridge might not have had official clearance, he wore the uniform. And that uniform still carried something few people dared to challenge, even here, even now. Camilla pointed toward the broken door behind him, voice shaking with rage. "That's forced entry. Criminal behaviour. I'll have your name stripped from every barracks record in London before midnight." Arthur said nothing. She stepped closer, daring him. "You're not special, Sergeant. You're a statue in a funny hat who forgot his place." Arthur's eyes didn't blink. "You have 10 seconds to walk back out that door," she continued, each word sharper than the last. 10, before I summon the King, before I summon legal counsel, before you find yourself in a cell built for treason." He stepped forward, once. She stepped back. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "Then you'll regret this," she spat. Arthur looked past her, one gloved hand brushing the edge of a marble console table. His voice stayed calm, flat. "No, ma'am. What I'll regret is not doing this sooner." He moved deeper into the hallway. The aide by the kitchen shifted aside without being asked. The housekeeper didn't reappear. Camilla shouted behind him, voice cracking now. "This is outrageous!" "I'm the Queen Consort." Arthur kept walking, and as he passed the sitting room doors, he muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "If I am mad, you made me." The sitting room hadn't seen disorder in decades, not since Queen Elizabeth herself had visited for tea and insisted on adjusting her own cushion. Everything else, every gilded frame, every antique clock, every thread of the Persian rug, had been curated like sacred glass. Arthur didn't care. He shoved a Louis XVI armchair aside with one hand. The oak legs scraped a long, ugly line across the floorboards. A crystal ashtray shattered under his boot. He moved to the bookshelves next, pulled down leather-bound volumes one by one, letting them thud and scatter across the carpet. "Have you lost your mind?" Camilla shrieked from the doorway. "This is a royal residence!" Arthur yanked open a cabinet. Silk-lined drawers came free, spilling wine decanters and old letters onto the floor. "You think you can raid this home like you're storming Baghdad?" came a new voice, slurred, arrogant, half-drunk. Thomas Parker Bowles stepped into view from the corridor, shirt half-buttoned, cufflinks undone, a tumbler of something amber in one hand. Arthur didn't answer. He grabbed the heavy coffee table in the centre of the room and flipped it, hard. It crashed onto its side. Two porcelain figurines, a corgi and a jockey, exploded on impact. "You're in my home," Thomas growled, stepping forward now. Arthur didn't even look up. His voice came out calm, final. "Touch me, and I'll put you through that wall." Thomas hesitated, then raised his voice, trying to sound in control. "This is a violation of every code you've sworn to uphold. You're supposed to guard the monarchy, not smash it." "I'm not here for the monarchy," Arthur said, prying open a glass display case. "I'm here for the truth." Camilla stormed into the room behind them, fists clenched. "You absolute lunatic. This is treason. There are protocols, channels. You've destroyed a cabinet older than your entire regiment." Arthur turned sharply, looked her dead in the eye. "Then write a bill for it." He moved past them both, ignoring the growing circle of staff hovering in the hallway. No one stepped in. No one dared. The door at the far end of the corridor, the one Camilla had screamed about earlier, sat locked. Arthur twisted the handle. It didn't budge. He took one step back, then drove his shoulder into the wood. Crack! It burst open, slamming against the interior wall. Inside, wardrobes, boxes stacked high, garment bags lined with plastic, tiaras in velvet-lined trays, replicas by the look of them. Arthur didn't slow down. He tore open drawers, flipped garment racks, ripped padding off shelves, like a man searching for something he knew was there. Camilla's voice cracked behind him. "I'll have your rank ground to dust!" Arthur ripped the backboard off one of the closets and tossed it across the room. It clattered against the floor. "Then bury me with it," he said, without looking back. He moved to a tall corner cabinet, white paint, decorated with old family crests. The only thing in the room still untouched. He knelt, ran his fingers along the edges. The back panel had a sound to it. Hollow. He stood, gripped the top, and ripped the entire cabinet down in one motion. It crashed to the floor, splintered and broken. Behind it, nothing but plaster. But something in the air had shifted. Arthur tilted his head, sniffed once, lightly, then muttered gravel low and certain. "There's something here. I can smell it." The hallway lights flickered as the elevator doors slammed open below. Heavy steps echoed up the staircase, leather soles, fast, furious. Then came the voice. "Where is he?" King Charles's entrance wasn't regal. It was fury in tailored black. Two aides trailed behind, breathless, trying to keep up. One carried a folder. The other held a phone lit up with missed calls from half the royal household. Camilla met him at the broken doorway, voice trembling but sharp. "He's gone completely mad." He kicked the door in. He's destroyed furniture. He's tearing this place apart like it's a drug raid. Charles's eyes swept the wreckage. Glass, wood, velvet debris littered the floor like a museum sacked during war. A royal residence reduced to chaos in minutes. Then his gaze landed on Arthur, dust-covered, arms deep inside what used to be a wardrobe, prying back insulation boards with a bent curtain rod. "Sergeant Bainbridge," Charles said, voice sharp and cold, "stand down." Arthur didn't. He shifted the insulation aside, leaned further into the cavity. The wall behind it looked wrong. A line, barely visible, ran vertically across the plaster, sealed, padded, hidden. "I gave you an order," Charles repeated, louder this time. "This is not your jurisdiction." "You've overstepped beyond forgiveness," Arthur spoke without turning around. "With respect, Your Majesty, this isn't about jurisdiction." Camilla scoffed. "He doesn't care about protocol, Charles. He thinks he's some kind of truth crusader. I want him arrested." Charles marched into the room now, glass crunching under his shoes. "This is a disgrace to the regiment." Arthur stood at last, turned to face him, covered in dust, uniform dishevelled, one brass button missing, bare skin flecked with debris. But his eyes? Clear, steady, unmoving. "You said the Queen's legacy would be preserved," Arthur said evenly. Charles stopped. Arthur pointed toward the corner of the room. "What's on display at Windsor right now is a lie." Camilla exploded. "How dare you!" Arthur cut her off. Fake coronation silk, replica sashes, gemstones swapped with glass. I've seen the tags, the signatures, the seal stamps. They were too perfect. Charles stiffened. You're basing this raid on a feeling. I'm basing it, Arthur said, on the fact that I know how the original tags were pressed. I know how Queen Elizabeth folded her personal sashes. I know the serial numbers that came back from Windsor Restoration in 2019. He stepped forward. And the one I saw downstairs? That tag didn't match. Not age, not fibre, not signature. Camilla went pale. You're insane. Charles raised one hand toward Arthur, voice tight. Enough. This stops now. You're finished. Walk out while there's still dignity left to salvage. Arthur looked past him, then back. No. He moved back to the wall, knocked once with his knuckles. Hollow. Knocked again. Different spot. A softer echo. Something behind it. Then he looked over his shoulder, just once. Unless you're willing to open this yourself, I'm doing it now. Silence. Camilla hissed. It's a private storage compartment. Charles looked at her, then at Thomas, who had gone pale and quiet in the corner, then at the wall, then finally at Arthur. Get a tool, he said to the aide behind him. Arthur stepped aside, said nothing, just waited. The aide returned in under a minute, with a slim crowbar and a utility blade, tools that had no business being in a royal apartment. Arthur paused for the first time since he'd entered, not to hesitate, but to let the moment settle. Because once this wall came down, there would be no more pretending, no more excuses. Whatever lay behind that sealed plaster would decide everything, not just for him, but for all of them. The room had gone dead quiet. Staff in the hallway no longer whispered. Camilla stood rigid beside the shattered console table, pearls stiff at her throat, jaw clenched so hard it looked ready to crack. Thomas leaned against the far wall, pale, breathing shallowly. King Charles hovered just behind Arthur, hands clasped tight, knuckles white. Arthur gripped the crowbar, drove it into the thin crack he'd discovered, a vertical seam just behind where the cabinet had stood. Plaster chipped away like brittle icing. Behind it, a sheet of matte black steel emerged, smooth, bordered in brushed brass. A vault door, no keypad, just a biometric panel inset in the corner. Arthur stepped back. Charles moved closer. His voice came out softer now, almost disbelieving. What is this? Camilla stepped forward fast, heels clicking sharp on the floor, reaching for the wall. It's nothing. A decorative enclosure, part of the old wine cellar. Lies, Arthur said calmly. She turned on him, rage boiling over. You insolent, dust-covered street soldier. You think you can judge what belongs in this family's home? Arthur didn't blink. This isn't a home. It's a hiding place. He turned to the aide. Blade. The man hesitated, then handed it over without a word. Arthur pressed the thin blade into the corner of the frame, found the tension point, and sliced. Not to open, just to confirm. There, wedged in the seam, a pressurization seal, industrial grade, thermal protected, preservation standard. Your Majesty, Arthur said, still looking at the panel, this isn't furniture storage. This is archival preservation. This was built to hide something. Camilla's voice trembled now, not with fear but fury. If you open that, Charles, you're betraying this family. Betraying me. Thomas spoke for the first time, voice shaking. We don't even know what's in there. Don't escalate this. Arthur stood, breathing slow. It's not escalation if it's the end of a lie. Charles stared at the panel for a long time, then at Camilla, then back. Biometric lock? He asked quietly. Camilla said nothing. Yours or his? Still nothing. Arthur held his gaze. We open it. Now. Charles exhaled, long, tight, then stepped forward. Without another word, he placed his hand on the panel. A low beep sounded, then another. Click, click. The hiss of the pressure seal releasing. The vault door shifted outward and in. Arthur reached forward, slowly, and pulled it open. Inside, Rows of silk-wrapped objects, velvet boxes, gilded cases, soft light activated from an internal strip, illuminating names etched in silver across each package. Camilla gasped. Thomas stepped back. Charles said nothing. Arthur's eyes moved across the shelf. He reached forward, carefully, and lifted the topmost label. Royal Collection Transfer, Queen Elizabeth II, Coronation Gown, Original. He looked back at Charles. "This," he said quietly, "is what's missing from Windsor." The vault door groaned open with a mechanical sigh, releasing a faint rush of cold, preserved air that carried the sterile scent of archival containment, dry cotton, aged velvet, and something older. Memory. Inside, rows of silk-wrapped heirlooms stood in perfect silence, each one labelled with neat silver tags, names, dates, identifiers from a legacy that was supposed to be locked away at Windsor. Charles stepped forward slowly. He didn't touch anything at first. His hand just hovered above the nearest parcel, a long rectangular box with a handwritten note on top. QEI, Coronation Gown, Do Not Fold. His lips parted. That can't be. Arthur reached beside it and pulled a velvet pouch into view, unwrapped it carefully. Inside, the coronation sapphire brooch, gleaming even in the vault's dull light. The real one, not the copy sitting behind glass at Kensington. Arthur didn't need to say it. Everyone in the room knew. The displays across every palace, the exhibitions, the televised tributes, the so-called legacy walkthroughs, had been filled with replicas, well-crafted lies. The originals had been here, in Thomas Parker Bowles's apartment. God, Charles breathed. His voice cracked. That's her real sash! He turned to Camilla, eyes wide with something between confusion and pain. Why? Why was this not returned to Windsor after the funeral? Camilla didn't answer. Her expression hardened. Cold, strategic. We preserved them, she said flatly. We ensured they wouldn't be buried under bureaucracy. Forgotten. Arthur stepped in again. You didn't preserve them. You hid them. Thomas tried to interject, voice weak. It was for safekeeping. Away from meddling. Away from the press. Arthur didn't look at him. Then why fake the replacements? Why forge collection tags? Why build a vault behind a false wall? Camilla snapped back. Because your entire institution is a lie. You think the Queen's legacy matters to those boys in suits at Whitehall? They wanted her out of the way the second Charles was crowned. These items weren't protected. They were at risk. Charles looked at her like he'd never seen her before. That was my mother, he said quietly. These were hers. Her letters, her robes, her voice. You had no right. She held his stare. And you had no courage to keep them safe. The silence turned sharp, personal. Arthur remained still, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Charles looked back at the vault, scanned the catalogued labels. Each piece more damning than the last. Tiara cases marked Display Replica, Approved 2023 tar. Handwritten ledgers with entries like Swapped April 14th, 2023, Store Original, Windsor Copy Logged. A manila folder on the top shelf. Royal Legacy Staging Plan, Media Alignment. He reached up, closed the folder slowly, then turned to Arthur. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried finality. Seal everything. Every item, every note, every piece of this vault. Arthur nodded once. Then Charles added, without hesitation, under his command. Camilla's breath caught. Thomas stepped back like he'd been struck. And Arthur? He just turned toward the vault and began cataloguing the Queen's real legacy, one stolen piece at a time. Item by item, Arthur unwrapped what had been hidden. The vault shelves were stacked with objects no one outside the royal archives should have seen since the day of the funeral. Each one folded with surgical precision. Wrapped in acid-free silk. Tagged, labelled, and deliberately separated from the official inventory. The coronation gown, pale ivory shimmering with gold thread, was folded across a moulded frame. The stitching still carried dust from Westminster Abbey. A single strand of hair clung to the shoulder. Elizabeth's. Arthur recognized the hand finishing. No replica could ever recreate it. Beneath it, a small rectangular box held the sovereign's orb, not the one displayed at Buckingham last spring, which Arthur now realized was a plated stand-in. This one had the original micro-pitting from decades of wear. The diamond cross on top had a faint tilt, a flaw Elizabeth had famously refused to correct for vanity. The truth was undeniable. These weren't heirlooms, forgotten in some administrative shuffle. They were stolen. And someone, Camilla, Thomas, or both, had gone to elaborate lengths to swap them with fakes across royal institutions. Arthur pulled out a folder tucked along the base of the vault. A ledger, handwritten. First column, item description. Second column, location swapped. Third column, replica logged / real stored. One entry read, Sapphire Bow Brooch, replica approved by WH Archivist. Original placed into containment vault. Parker Residence, July 2023. Another QEII coronation gloves, removed post-funeral, fibre forensic replica installed. Public none the wiser. Arthur turned the ledger toward Charles. The king's eyes scanned the lines. His hand trembled as he reached out and touched one of the velvet cases. Inside, Queen Elizabeth's handwritten letters, bound in soft blue ribbon. On top sat a yellowed page folded in half, labelled in ink. To be held with regalia, not for display. He opened it. His mother's handwriting stared back at him. If any part of this crown is ever hidden, replaced, or rewritten, it is no longer a symbol. It is theft, and you, Charles, must be the one to correct it. Elizabeth R. The words hit harder than any shout ever could. Charles didn't move, didn't blink. He just stood in front of the legacy he'd failed to protect. Camilla stepped forward, trying to salvage it. She didn't understand what the monarchy needed. She was sentimental. We were trying to preserve continuity, not cling to old robes and jewellery. You weren't preserving, Arthur said, voice lower now. You were editing. Thomas looked panicked. This doesn't need to go further. We put things back, quietly. Nobody has to... Arthur cut in. You didn't just hoard relics. You stole her story. You took everything the public trusted and rewrote it. Camilla's voice sharpened. Oh, spare me your moral fantasy. You're a ceremonial puppet with delusions of grandeur. We did what was necessary. Arthur turned to her, calm again. You buried her legacy, he said, to build your own. The line cut deeper than anything yet, and for once Camilla had no reply. King Charles didn't speak. Not at first. He just stared at the page in his hands, the one in his mother's handwriting, ink slightly faded, folds worn soft from years of being stored exactly how she'd left it. And you, Charles, must be the one to correct it. That line echoed louder than anything Camilla had shouted all night. Arthur didn't speak either. He simply stood still, dust-covered and exhausted, watching the man who wore the crown realize what had been taken, not just from the monarchy, but from him. Camilla moved first. Her tone wasn't apologetic, it was surgical. She was stuck in a different century, she said, stepping lightly toward Charles. You were building a modern monarchy. A relevant one. These relics. They were dead weight. Symbols of an empire we no longer rule. This wasn't theft, it was refinement. She reached out, touched his sleeve. And if you really think about it, you know I'm right. Charles looked down at her hand, then slowly pulled his arm away. You lied, he said quietly. She blinked. Excuse me. To me. To them. To the entire country. You lied about her artifacts, about her memory. You buried what she gave us and sold the public a duplicate. It was harmless, she hissed. No one knew. Arthur's voice cut in, low and final. We know now. Camilla turned on him like a viper. You overstepped every boundary of service. You violated a sovereign residence. You destroyed property. You disobeyed orders. You humiliated the king in front of his staff. Arthur didn't flinch. And I'd do it again. Charles looked between them, slowly, deliberately, then said, He wasn't the one who humiliated me. Camilla reeled back, Stunned, Thomas looked ready to faint. Charles turned toward Arthur. "You succeeded where I was blind. You saw what I didn't. And you acted, not out of ego, but out of duty." Arthur gave no response. He didn't need to. "Everything in this vault," Charles continued, gesturing toward the open chamber, "is to be repatriated to Windsor under Royal Collections supervision. Sealed, inspected, catalogued." Camilla tried again. "Charles, this isn't you. You're being manipulated." "No," he snapped. "What I am is ashamed." He turned his back to her, then addressed the aide nearby. "Summon the liaison from Royal Collections and a secure transport team." Arthur waited, unmoving. Then Charles looked at him once more. "All of it," the king said. "Sealed. Tracked. Under your command." Arthur gave the smallest of nods. "Yes, sir." The command landed like a stone dropped in still water, rippling outward through the aides, the staff, the very air. Camilla stood alone now. No more smugness, no more control, just a woman watching everything she tried to curate slip away. And Charles, still facing the vault, spoke once more, this time without turning. "I failed her as a son." Arthur replied softly, "No, sir. You just hadn't seen the truth yet." Arthur moved with clinical precision after that, cataloguing each recovered item with gloved hands, his body calm, methodical. Unlike the wreckage he'd left behind. The velvet tiara case was sealed first, then the coronation sash, the gown, the letters, each piece placed into protective lockboxes under his supervision. Every tag verified. Every number cross-checked against a digital manifest, updated in real time by the Royal Collections liaison, now standing silently by with a trembling tablet. No one interrupted, not Charles, not Thomas, and certainly not Camilla. The apartment no longer felt like a residence. It felt like a scene, a crime scene, not of violence, but of betrayal. Behind Arthur, staff from the palace had begun removing debris and shattered antiques. Not out of concern for property, but out of silent acknowledgement that the illusion had been broken. The door still lay off its hinges, brass handle crushed beneath a broken cabinet leg. Arthur gave one last nod to the liaison. "All secured. Confirm final lock and transfer." "Yes, Sergeant." He turned. Camilla stood near the fireplace, arms crossed. Not in defiance, in preservation. Her pearls looked too tight around her neck now, her gloves suddenly too white. Thomas hovered behind her, trying to look angry but failing. His eyes stayed locked on the vault, as if the truth inside still had the power to burn him. Arthur began walking toward the door. Halfway through, Camilla spoke, just loud enough to be heard, just venomous enough to sting. "You're still just a soldier in a silly hat." Arthur stopped, turned halfway back, looked at her, not with rage, not with triumph, just clarity. "And you," he said quietly, "are a queen with no crown, left to steal." The line cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. Camilla's expression twisted, first with disbelief, then with something uglier. But before she could reply, Charles stepped into her line of sight and said nothing, just looked at her. And that silence said everything. Arthur stepped over the shattered threshold and back into the hall. Aides and staff parted for him without a word. Not out of fear, but respect. Something had shifted. Something institutional. The quiet kind that reshapes everything, even if it's never publicly acknowledged. He walked down the corridor, boots clicking against the marble in slow, steady rhythm. Not rushed, not triumphant, just right. As he passed the last aide, a young man with wide eyes and a trembling phone, Arthur paused for half a second. "Log everything under direct evidence chain. Nothing is to be touched without my mark." "Yes, Sergeant," the aide stammered. Then Arthur walked out the same door he had kicked in, only this time he didn't need to force anything open. The world had already opened itself. And as the transport van pulled away with the Queen's true legacy secured inside, Camilla was still standing in that ruined apartment, staring at the vault she could no longer control. Should a royal guard be allowed to break into royal property without permission if it means defending the Queen's true legacy? Was King Charles too late to act, or did he finally do the right thing? And if you saw something suspicious, would you risk everything to uncover the truth? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe no one should rewrite what Queen Elizabeth stood for, hit that like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on so you don't miss what really happens behind palace walls. And don't keep this to yourself. Share this story with someone who still remembers her dignity. Our next story is already waiting on screen, so go watch that now. We upload daily. Same time tomorrow. We'll see you then.